The giant alien warship called Sovereign's Will looked like a floating city of death above Earth. It was so huge that it blocked out the sun in some places, casting dark shadows across entire countries. The ship's metal hull was covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with their own light. People on Earth looked up at the sky and felt their hearts sink with fear. Inside the alien vessel, Ambassador Kextar prepared to deliver his message. He was a tall creature, with green scales covering his body and 4 yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. His mouth was full of sharp teeth, and when he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding metal. He had done this same thing 847 times before on different planets across the galaxy. Each time the primitive species had surrendered without a fight. Kextar activated the communication system and sent his message down to the tiny blue planet below. His words were cold and final, like a judge reading a death sentence. He told the humans they had exactly 30 days to give up completely. There would be no negotiations, no deals, no second chances. They could surrender and become slaves, or they could die fighting a war they could never win. On Earth, in a deep underground bunker beneath Seoul, Defense Coordinator Kim Jin-ho sat at a massive table surrounded by glowing screens. He was a quiet man in his 50s with grey hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. The bunker was filled with the sound of computers humming and people typing rapidly on keyboards. Red warning lights flashed on the walls, and everyone could feel the tension in the air. Lieutenant Park Min-ho stood behind Jin-ho, his hands shaking slightly as he waited for orders. Min-ho was young, maybe 25, and this was his first time dealing with anything like this. He had trained for years, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment when aliens actually showed up and threatened to destroy humanity. Jin-ho listened to the alien's message without changing his expression. While everyone else in the room looked terrified, he remained perfectly calm. He had been expecting this day for a very long time. He picked up a small device and spoke into it clearly and calmly. The response he sent back to the alien ship was simple and polite. He thanked them for the warning and told them that Earth would be ready. There was no fear in his voice, no begging, no anger, just a quiet confidence that made everyone in the room feel a little bit braver. Up on the alien ship, Kextar received the message and started laughing. It was a horrible sound, like metal scraping against stone. He had heard similar responses before from other species, and they always ended the same way. The primitive creatures would try to fight, fail miserably, and then beg for mercy. But by then it would be too late. What Kextar didn't know was that Earth had been preparing for this moment for over 200 years. Hidden deep beneath the oceans and mountains, ancient machines were already waking up, ready to show the galaxy what humans were really capable of when they were pushed too far. War Marshal Drex Von stood like a giant in the command center of his flagship Dominion's Edge. He was twice the size of a human, with thick armor plating covering his entire body and 6 powerful arms that could crush steel. His voice boomed through the massive room as he spoke to hundreds of fleet commanders who had gathered from across the galaxy. The holographic displays around them showed Earth's military in painful detail. Drex Von pointed at the images with one of his clawed hands and started laughing. The humans were still using chemical rockets that barely made it to their own moon. Their fastest spaceships moved like crawling insects compared to council vessels. Their weapons were ancient kinetic projectiles and primitive nuclear bombs that any council shield could easily stop. "Look at this pathetic display," Drex Von growled, his voice filled with contempt. "These creatures are still burning fossil fuels to power their machines. They haven't even figured out basic energy manipulation. Their largest warship is smaller than one of our supply vessels." The other commanders joined in his laughter. They had conquered hundreds of worlds, and Earth looked like the easiest target they had ever seen. Some worlds at least had energy, shields or plasma weapons, but Earth seemed stuck in the Stone Age of technology. Their satellites were simple metal boxes, their space stations were tiny and fragile, and their military bases looked like they were built with primitive concrete and steel. "Prepare the invasion fleet," Drex Von commanded. 10,000 ships should be more than enough to handle this insignificant world. We'll be done before their single moon completes one rotation. This will be the shortest conquest in the entire history of the Galactic Council. The fleet commanders saluted and returned to their ships, already planning how they would divide Earth's resources among themselves. They had no idea that every satellite they had detected was actually a sophisticated sensor, carefully designed to look primitive while secretly studying their technology for the past 50 years. Far below on Earth, deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, where no human eye had ever seen, massive installations that had been sleeping for 2 centuries suddenly came to life. The water around them began to glow with strange energy as ancient machines started their awakening process. These weren't human machines, they were something far older and more powerful. In her laboratory in Busan, Dr. Lee Sora watched her computer screens with growing excitement. She was a small, quiet woman who had dedicated her entire life to this moment. Her fingers moved quickly across the control panels as she monitored systems that most humans didn't even know existed. Project Horizon is fully active, she reported into her secure communication device. All defensive networks are coming online, the deep ocean installations are responding perfectly, the mountain facilities are powering up, even the lunar bases are ready. Above ground, the world continued its carefully planned performance. News channels showed panicking crowds and helpless military leaders. Scientists appeared on television claiming that humanity had no way to fight back against such advanced aliens. World leaders made desperate speeches about hoping for peace, while secretly knowing that war was inevitable. But beneath the surface, Earth was transforming into something the Galactic Council had never encountered before. A world that had been waiting patiently for this exact moment for over 200 years. The 12 Council scout ships entered Earth's solar system like wolves hunting sheep. Their sleek silver hulls gleamed in the sunlight as they spread out in perfect formation. Captain Vextul commanded the lead vessel, confident that this would be the easiest scouting mission of his career. His sensors showed nothing but empty space and a few primitive human satellites that posed no threat whatsoever. "Begin standard reconnaissance sweep," Vextul ordered his crew. "Document their defensive positions and weapon systems. This should take no more than 1 solar rotation." The alien scouts moved deeper into the system, their advanced sensors scanning for human military installations. They found exactly what they expected: crude space stations, slow-moving cargo ships, and simple communication satellites. Everything looked perfectly normal and completely helpless. Then space itself seemed to explode around them. Human warships appeared from absolutely nowhere, materializing out of what had looked like empty vacuum just seconds before. These weren't the primitive vessels their intelligence reports had described. These ships moved like liquid lightning, changing direction at impossible speeds that should have crushed any living creature inside them. Commander Kim Hyun-woo sat calmly in the captain's chair of the Soul's Vengeance, watching his tactical display with cold satisfaction. His ship had been invisible, waiting patiently in the shadow of an asteroid that didn't actually exist. The holographic camouflage had worked perfectly, making the Council scouts believe they were alone. "Target the lead scout vessel first," Hyun-woo said quietly to his weapons officer. "Let's see how their shields handle our new toys." 3 Council scout ships suddenly found themselves trapped in a triangle formation, with human vessels appearing behind each one simultaneously. The aliens tried to turn and fight, but their ships moved like they were swimming through thick mud compared to the human vessels. "Weapons free," Hyun-woo ordered, his voice as calm as if he were ordering tea. What happened next defied everything the Council thought they knew about physics and warfare. Beams of pure energy erupted from the human ships, but these weren't the crude lasers or plasma weapons the aliens were familiar with. These quantum beam weapons passed through the Council's energy shields like they weren't even there, cutting through the alien hulls like a hot knife through butter. The first scout ship simply came apart, its pieces floating silently in space. The second one lasted exactly 3 seconds longer before its reactor exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The third scout tried to run, but a human ship that had been hidden behind Mars appeared directly in its path. In less than 60 seconds, 11 of the 12 Council scout vessels had been completely destroyed. The human ships hadn't taken a single hit. They moved with such precision and speed that the aliens couldn't even target them properly. Only one Council ship managed to escape, and even that one was badly damaged. Captain Zekmor's vessel limped back toward the main fleet, its hull breached in 17 places and its crew in a state of complete shock. "Impossible," Zekmor whispered as he watched the tactical replay. "They were toying with us. They could have destroyed us all in the first 10 seconds, but they were testing our weapons, studying our responses, learning everything about us." When Zekmor's panicked report reached War Marshal Drexvon, the massive alien commander dismissed it immediately. "Cowardice and incompetence," he growled. "No primitive species could possess such technology. That mistake would soon cost him his entire fleet." The massive Council invasion fleet approached Earth like a dark cloud covering the stars. 10,000 warships moved in perfect formation, their hulls bristling with weapons that had conquered nearly 1,000 worlds. War Marshal Drexvon stood on his command bridge, watching the primitive blue planet grow larger on his screens. He expected to see a helpless world begging for mercy. Instead, he witnessed something that made his blood run cold. Captain Lee Jiho stood calmly on the bridge of humanity's flagship, the Eternal Defiance. Unlike the crude vessels the Council had been tracking, this ship was a masterpiece of advanced technology that made their own vessels look like ancient relics. Jiho had been waiting his entire life for this moment, just like his father and grandfather before him. "All deception protocols are now offline," Jiho announced to his crew. "It's time to show them what Earth really is." Across the entire solar system, the most incredible transformation began to unfold. What the Council had thought was simple, asteroid mining stations suddenly opened up like deadly flowers, revealing massive weapon platforms that had been hidden for decades. Each one was larger than most Council battleships and armed with technology that shouldn't have been possible. The moon, which had looked like it only had a few small research bases, split open in dozens of places. Enormous railguns emerged from beneath the surface, each one capable of firing projectiles at nearly the speed of light. The entire lunar surface had been secretly converted into the largest fortress in human history. On Mars, what the aliens had assumed were primitive terraforming colonies suddenly deployed shield generators so powerful they created a protective barrier around the entire planet. The Red Planet had never been about making a new home for humans. It had always been about creating an impregnable military base. Even the space stations that had looked so fragile and primitive suddenly transformed. Their outer shells fell away like snakeskin, revealing sleek warships that had been hiding in plain sight. Hundreds of vessels that the Council had dismissed as harmless cargo haulers suddenly bristled with weapons and advanced armor. Admiral Park Yunbi appeared on every Council communication channel simultaneously, her image broadcast from the bridge, of a ship that seemed to be made of pure energy and light. She was an elderly woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much, but her voice was strong and clear. "For over 200 years, my ancestors watched your Council spread across the galaxy like a disease," she said calmly. "We studied every species you conquered. We learned from their mistakes. We analyzed every weapon you used, every tactic you employed, every weakness you exploited." The Council fleet commanders stared in horror as more and more human installations revealed themselves. Weapon platforms emerged from behind every planet and moon. Entire asteroid fields suddenly came alive with hidden bases. Even comets that had been drifting peacefully through space opened up to reveal surveillance stations that had been watching the Council for generations. "You thought you were invading a primitive world," Admiral Yunbi continued. Her voice now transmitted directly into every Council ship. "But Earth was never primitive. We've been preparing for this day since before your great-grandfathers were born. Every trade mission you sent, every diplomatic contact, every piece of intelligence you gathered about us, we were gathering 10 times more about you." The Council fleet found themselves completely surrounded by an enemy that had anticipated their every move, studied their every weakness, and built countermeasures for everything they could possibly do. Earth wasn't a victim waiting to be conquered. It was a trap that had been 2 centuries in the making. The battle began like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before. Captain Kim Dong-hyun's squadron of human fighters moved through space in ways that seemed to break the laws of physics. His ships could change direction instantly without slowing down, turning sharp corners at impossible speeds, while the pilots inside remained perfectly comfortable. The Council pilots tried to follow the same maneuvers, but their bodies couldn't handle the extreme forces. One by one, alien pilots began passing out from the crushing pressure, their ships spinning wildly out of control as their crews lost consciousness. What should have been an even fight quickly became a one-sided massacre. "How are they doing that?" screamed Captain Vexmore from his damaged Council cruiser. "No living creature can survive those acceleration forces." Dongyun smiled as he listened to the aliens' panicked communications. "Gravitational field manipulation," he said to his co-pilot. "We don't feel the G-forces because we're not actually accelerating. We're bending space around us instead." Across the battlefield, Commander Li Yejin prepared to demonstrate another piece of humanity's hidden arsenal. Her stealth frigate had been completely invisible to Council sensors, floating silently among the enemy fleet like a ghost. Now it was time to reveal what human science had accomplished while the galaxy thought. They were primitive. "Deploy quantum torpedoes," Yejin ordered calmly, watching as her targeting computer locked onto 12 Council battleships simultaneously. The weapons that launched from her ship didn't look like traditional missiles. They appeared as glowing orbs of pure energy that seemed to flicker in and out of existence as they flew through space. The Council ships immediately raised their shields and prepared their point defense systems, confident that they could stop any primitive human weapon. They were wrong. The quantum torpedoes passed through the Council's energy shields like they weren't even there. The weapons existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making conventional defenses completely useless. They phased directly through the outer hulls of the enemy ships and exploded inside, tearing the vessels apart from within. 12 massive Council battleships simply disintegrated in brilliant flashes of light, their crews never even understanding what had killed them. But the most terrifying weapons in humanity's arsenal were yet to be revealed. From hidden platforms throughout the solar system, clouds of what looked like silver dust began drifting toward the Council fleet. The aliens initially ignored these strange particles, assuming they were just debris from the destroyed ships. They realized their mistake too late. The nanite swarms were microscopic machines, each one smaller than a virus, but more intelligent than most organic brains. They worked together in perfect coordination, controlled by quantum artificial intelligence systems that could think and adapt faster than any living creature in the galaxy. War Marshal Drexvon watched in absolute horror as his flagship began dissolving around him. The nanites were taking apart his ship at the molecular level, breaking down the hull atom by atom, while simultaneously studying his vessel's technology and adapting their own capabilities. "Emergency evacuation!" he roared to his crew, but it was already too late. The nanites had spread throughout his ship's systems, disabling the escape pods and life support systems. His magnificent dreadnought was being consumed like food by an invisible enemy he couldn't even see properly. "They're not just defending their world," Drexvon whispered in growing terror as he realized the scope of humanity's capabilities. "They're hunting us. This entire battle is just them testing their weapons on live targets." Throughout the solar system, the Council's mighty invasion fleet found itself being systematically destroyed by an enemy that had spent 2 centuries preparing for this exact moment. Every weapon, every tactic, every defensive measure the aliens possessed had already been studied and countered by human scientists who understood war better than any species in the galaxy. The retreat from Earth's solar system turned into the most chaotic disaster in Council military history. What remained of the once mighty invasion fleet scattered in every direction, desperately trying to escape the relentless human pursuit. But as the surviving ships limped back toward their home territories, they discovered something that filled them with absolute terror. They weren't running to safety. They were running into a trap that had been waiting for them across the entire galaxy. Intelligence Officer Park Jimin sat in Earth's primary war room, surrounded by hundreds of glowing screens that showed star maps spanning the entire galaxy. He had been coordinating this moment for 15 years, ever since he had graduated from the secret military academy that most humans didn't even know existed. His fingers moved across holographic controls as reports flooded in from every corner of Council space. "Hegemony shipyards at Proxima 7 are completely neutralized," he reported calmly to his superiors. Vorthak supply convoys in the outer rim have been severed. All primary military installations in sectors 12 through 18 are now offline. Each report represented years of careful planning and infiltration. Human agents had been placed in every major council facility decades ago, patiently waiting for this exact moment. Now they were all activating simultaneously, turning the council's own infrastructure against them. The Hegemony High Command watched in disbelief as their most secure military shipyards exploded one after another. These facilities had been protected by energy shields and defensive platforms that should have made them impossible to attack. But the explosions were coming from inside the installations themselves, triggered by maintenance workers and security guards who had been human agents all along. On the other side of the galaxy, the Vorthak Collective discovered that their entire supply network had been compromised. Cargo ships that had been delivering food and weapons to their military forces for years suddenly revealed their true nature. The ships opened up like deadly flowers, releasing swarms of human fighters that destroyed everything in sight before vanishing back into hyperspace. Even species that lived in the supposedly safe galactic core found themselves under attack. The Zephyri Trade Council had always believed their homeworld was too far from the frontier to ever be threatened by war. They learned how wrong they were when human warships materialized directly above their capital city, emerging from what had appeared to be empty space. Supreme Councillor Zephran stood on his palace balcony, staring up at the human vessels that hung in his sky like mechanical vultures. His hands shook as he realized that these ships hadn't traveled from Earth. They had been hiding in his own star system for years, watching and waiting. "How long have they been watching us?" he whispered to his aide, his voice barely audible, over the sound of his world's defense sirens. The answer came from every communication device in the galaxy, simultaneously. General Kim Seong-min's face appeared on screens throughout council space, his calm expression more terrifying than any alien war cry. He was an older man with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything, speaking from what looked like a command center buried deep beneath Earth's surface. "Since before your grandfather was born," Seong-min said, his words transmitted directly into every council facility, every government building, every military base across hundreds of worlds. "We've been in your homes, your governments, your armies. We've been your neighbors, your co-workers, your trusted advisors." The broadcast continued as panic spread through council territories like wildfire. "Every time you conquered a new world, we were there studying your methods. Every time you developed a new weapon, we built countermeasures. Every time you celebrated a victory, we were planning your defeat." Council species that had thought themselves the masters of the galaxy suddenly realized they had been living under the watchful eyes of humanity for generations. The hunters had become the hunted, and their prey had been patiently preparing to turn the tables for over 2 centuries. The next phase of humanity's war didn't involve weapons or explosions. Instead, it was something far more devastating: the complete destruction of trust throughout the Galactic Council. Operations Chief Lee Na-young sat in her underground facility, on Earth, preparing to unleash the most powerful weapon humanity had ever developed: the truth. For 70 years, Na-young had been collecting information from every corner of the galaxy. She had files on every council leader, every military commander, every government official who had ever made a decision. Now it was time to show the galaxy exactly what their leaders had been doing behind closed doors. "Begin Operation Transparency," she ordered her team of analysts. "Release everything we have on every council species simultaneously." What happened next shattered the foundations of galactic civilization. Across every communication network in council space, detailed intelligence files began broadcasting. These weren't military secrets or weapon designs. They were something far more dangerous to the council's unity. The broadcasts revealed which council leaders were secretly stealing from their own people. Financial records showed hegemony generals living in luxury while their soldiers went without proper equipment. Trade logs exposed Zephyri merchants selling weapons to both sides of conflicts to maximize profits. Personal communications revealed Vorthak admirals planning to abandon their allies if the war turned against them. On the hegemony homeworld, citizens watched in shock as recordings played of their supreme commander laughing about how easy it was to manipulate inferior species into doing the hegemony's dirty work. The same commander who gave speeches about council unity and cooperation was privately calling his allies useful idiots who deserved to be conquered eventually. Director Choi Min-soo appeared on screens throughout the galaxy, his calm voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. He was a thin man with intelligent eyes who had spent his entire career studying alien psychology and political structures. "For generations, we've been living among you," he announced. "We've been your janitors, cleaning your government buildings, listening to your classified meetings. We've been your translators, hearing every secret communication between your leaders. We've been your technical support staff, accessing every database you thought was secure." The revelations kept coming, each one more damaging than the last. Humans released recordings of Zephyri leaders planning to sell out their Vorthak allies in exchange for better trade deals. They broadcast evidence of Vorthak commanders deliberately sabotaging joint military operations to make other species look incompetent. They showed financial records proving that half the Council's leadership was embezzling funds meant for planetary defense. But the most shocking revelations involved the Council's treatment of conquered species. Humans broadcast footage from inside Council detention facilities, showing the brutal conditions that awaited any species that dared to resist. They revealed secret plans to gradually eliminate the populations of problematic worlds once they were no longer useful. Panic spread through Council territories as species realized how thoroughly they had been infiltrated. The hegemony discovered that their head of intelligence had been feeding information to humans for 20 years. The Vorthak found out that their most trusted military advisor was actually a human agent who had been steering their battle plans for decades. Some Council worlds learned that the human refugees they had been sheltering were actually observation posts, quietly monitoring their military capabilities and political weaknesses. Others discovered that entire families of immigrants were intelligence, networks that had been gathering information for generations. The psychological impact was devastating. How could any council leader trust their advisors when some of them might be human agents? How could military commanders share battle plans when their communications were clearly compromised? How could different species work together when humans had evidence that they were all planning to betray each other? The Galactic Council, which had seemed so powerful and united just days before, began tearing itself apart from within. Species started accusing each other of being human collaborators. Military alliances collapsed as evidence of planned betrayals became public. The great empire that had conquered nearly 1,000 worlds was destroying itself through suspicion and paranoia. And through it all, humanity watched and waited, knowing that the truth was more powerful than any weapon they could have built. The mighty Galactic Council that had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years began falling apart like a house of cards in a windstorm. What had started as a unified invasion of Earth turned into every species desperately trying to save themselves from the humans who seemed to be everywhere at once. Analyst Kim Sun-woo worked around the clock in Earth's intelligence center, tracking the collapse of the galaxy's greatest empire in real time. His screens showed surrender requests flooding in from across Council space as panic spread from world to world. The Hegemony High Command has officially withdrawn from all joint operations. He reported to his superiors, barely able to hide his amazement at how quickly everything was falling apart. They're requesting immediate ceasefire negotiations through back-channel communications. Less than an hour later, another report came in. Vorthak collective leadership is begging for separate peace talks. They're offering to share their complete military database in exchange for protection from human retaliation. The reports kept coming faster than Sun-woo could process them. The Zephyri Trade Union was offering complete surrender and was willing to pay massive tribute to Earth. The Outer Rim Alliance was dissolving entirely, with individual planets trying to negotiate their own deals with humanity. Even the Core, worlds who had always considered themselves untouchable, were sending secret envoys to Earth begging for mercy. War Marshal Drexvon sat in his damaged command ship, watching his life's work crumble around him. For 50 years, he had helped build the Council into the most powerful force the galaxy had ever seen. Now he was witnessing its complete destruction in a matter of days. His communication systems buzzed constantly with messages from Council. Leaders who were abandoning their allies and trying to save themselves. The hegemony blamed the Vorthak for starting the war. The Vorthak accused the Zephyri of providing humans with intelligence. Everyone was pointing fingers and making deals behind each other's backs. "Sir," his aide whispered nervously, "we're receiving reports that some of our own species have been secretly working with the humans for decades. The evidence is overwhelming." Drexvon closed his eyes in defeat. Even his own people had betrayed the Council. How could they have fought an enemy that was already inside their organization from the very beginning? Admiral Park Ji-hoon's face appeared on communication screens throughout the galaxy, his calm voice cutting through the chaos and panic. He stood on the bridge of a human warship that seemed to be made of pure light, more advanced than anything the Council had ever imagined possible. "You made a fundamental mistake," Ji-hoon said, addressing the scattered Council forces directly. "You thought you were fighting Earth, one small planet with primitive technology. But you weren't fighting a planet. You were fighting a network that has been growing in your shadow for over 200 years. His words sent chills through every Council leader who heard them. "Every species you conquered, every world you oppressed, every population you enslaved, some of them came to us, some of them joined us, some of them helped us prepare for this day." The truth was even more devastating than the military defeats. The Council hadn't just been infiltrated by human agents. They had been betrayed by the very species they had spent centuries oppressing. Conquered worlds had been secretly feeding information to Earth for generations, waiting patiently for the day when humanity would finally strike back. "The Kalari Mining Guild has been our allies for 60 years, Ji-hoon continued. "The Nexus Research Collective has been sharing technology with us since before your current leaders were born. Even members of your own species grew tired of your tyranny and decided to help us bring you down." Across the galaxy, Council territories dissolved as humanity exploited every political weakness they had spent generations carefully mapping. Species that had been forced to work together under Council rule suddenly turned on each other, each trying to prove their loyalty to their new human protectors. The great empire that had once seemed unstoppable was tearing itself apart, and Earth hadn't even needed to fire a shot at most of their worlds. 6 months had passed since the Galactic Council delivered their arrogant ultimatum to Earth. Now the few surviving Council leaders found themselves aboard the human vessel Final Justice, floating in orbit around the blue planet they had once planned to conquer. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The ship itself was a masterpiece that defied everything the aliens thought they knew about technology. Its walls seemed to be made of crystallized starlight, and gravity flowed in gentle currents that kept everyone comfortable regardless of their species' original homeworld. The Council delegates who shuffled aboard looked like broken shadows of their former selves. Ambassador Lee Chanwoo stood at the head of the conference table, wearing the same calm expression he had maintained throughout the entire war. The aliens, who had dismissed him as a simple diplomat, now realized they had been negotiating with one of humanity's greatest military strategists all along. His quiet confidence had never been diplomatic politeness. It had been the patience of a hunter, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "The formal surrender documents have been prepared," Chanwoo announced, his voice carrying the same professional tone that had answered their original ultimatum 6 months ago. "The Galactic Protection Authority will oversee the transition to a new galactic order." Supreme Counselor Vexthal, once the most powerful being in the galaxy, now looked like a broken old creature barely able to lift his head. His empire was gone, his fleets destroyed, and his allies had all abandoned him to save themselves. He stared at the human who had orchestrated his complete downfall. "How long have you been planning this?" Vexthal whispered, his voice cracking. With exhaustion and defeat, Chanwoo's expression never changed. He had practiced this moment in his mind 1,000 times, just as his father and grandfather had before him. "Since the day we learned your empire existed," he replied simply. "Every generation of my family has worked toward this moment. We studied your expansion patterns, your military tactics, your political weaknesses. We prepared for every possible scenario. The other council survivors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some had been powerful war leaders just months ago. Others had ruled entire star systems. Now they were refugees begging for mercy from the species they had planned to enslave. But you must understand, Chanwu continued, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the room listen carefully. Humanity doesn't seek to rule the galaxy. We never wanted an empire like yours. We simply decided long ago that no one else would be allowed to build one either. Through the massive viewports of the final justice, Earth hung in space like a perfect blue jewel. The planet that the Council had dismissed as primitive and helpless now revealed itself as the most advanced world in the galaxy. Cities of light sparkled on its surface, and massive orbital stations surrounded it like protective guardians. The Galactic Protection Authority will not govern your worlds, Chanwu explained as he gestured toward the surrender documents. Instead, it will ensure that no single species ever again grows powerful enough to threaten the freedom of others. There will be trade, cooperation, and mutual respect, but never again will there be conquest and slavery. The former council leaders signed their names to the documents with shaking hands, knowing they had no choice. Their alternative was complete destruction, and the humans had already proven they possessed the power to follow through on that threat. Your species will be allowed to rebuild and prosper, Chanwu assured them, but you'll do so as equals among equals, not as masters ruling over slaves. Any attempt to recreate the old system will be met with immediate intervention. As the ceremony concluded, the delegates were escorted to transport ships that would take them back to their home worlds. They left as messengers, carrying word of the new reality to every corner of the galaxy. Earth had not conquered the galaxy, it had liberated it, and from now on humanity would stand as silent guardians, ensuring that freedom would never again be threatened by those who sought to rule over others. The age of galactic empires was over. The age of galactic freedom had begun,